Hi everyone, this is Unit 3 for Economics, and this will be 3.02 Supply and Demand 2. Imagine that you have just spent an hour playing your favorite sport. Now you feel thirsty. You have exactly $1, and that is enough to buy a soda. But what you really want is a big bottle of water that costs $1.50. You start to wonder, exactly who sets those prices? In a market economy, the answer is everybody. All the players in the economy, producers and consumers alike, play key roles in setting prices. The law of supply and demand helps make sense of prices and explains why they go up and down. You saw before that consumers and producers influence each other. One big way they do this is through their relationship to supply and demand. In this lesson, you will learn more about how producers decide on supply levels and prices. You will also look into how consumers decide what to buy and what price they are willing to pay for the goods and services they demand. By looking at both sides of the supply and demand equation, you will learn how prices are set in a free market economy. Alright, if you are interested, the student guide is right there. You can certainly print that off and follow along as I read. Wherever there is supply, there has to be demand. After all, nobody would bother to produce goods or services if people did not want to consume them. So what exactly determines demand? Price has a powerful influence on demand. If goods are inexpensive, consumers are more likely to buy them. But price is not the whole story. There are many types of goods and services, and many factors beyond price influence consumer behavior. Goods are things that satisfy what a consumer needs or wants, and services are actions that consumers value. Consumption is the use of goods and services. The ability of a good or service to increase satisfaction or happiness is utility. The wealth effect. What consumers can buy depends on their resources. When shopping for goods and services, the most important resource is money. After all, it takes money to buy things. The more money a consumer has, the more goods or services he or she can buy. And, according to economic theory, consumers do tend to buy more as their ability to do so increases. While it is not a rule that people with more money end up buying more goods and services, it happens with such regularity that economists have a term for it, the wealth effect. When incomes rise, people buy more goods. That is the wealth effect. It states that the more money breeds an appetite for more consumption. Slowing the feeding frenzy. The wealth effect is a tendency, not an ironclad rule, and there are factors working against the increased appetite for consumption. One of these is the principle of decreasing marginal utility. Another factor that curbs consumption is an individual's budget constraints. For instance, take James, who works at a company owned by Shannon. Because James does not make much money and rides the bus to work, he plans his routine around the bus schedule. His budget constraints limit his consumption choices. After 6 months, James gets a raise and is able to buy a car. Now he has the freedom to plan his day without worrying about the bus schedule. The car increased James' utility significantly. It has a large amount of marginal utility for James. In other words, the value of going from 0 cars to 1 car was very high. Overdrive. Now consider the owner, Shannon. She owns 5 different cars. Obviously, she can use only one of them at a time. So for Shannon, the added utility of having so many cars must come from the pleasure she gets from owning them. Shannon could likely afford to buy a 6th car, but if she did, she would not be likely to get much added utility from the purchase. Buying a 6th car would certainly not provide as much utility to Shannon as James obtained from buying his 1 car. This is an example of decreasing marginal utility. James and Shannon have different patterns of spending because their finances require them to have different priorities. Because Shannon has more money than James, she can afford to spend a lot to get only a small increase in utility. For his part, James must be careful to put his limited funds where they will result in the highest increase in utility. Normal goods. The goods that people will buy more of as a result of the wealth effect are called normal goods. Normal goods are not called normal because everyone has them, nor does the term necessarily refer to the quality of a good. In economics, normal has a special meaning. Normal goods are the things that the majority of people buy more of as their wealth increases. Normal goods are those goods that just about everybody buys when they have the ability to do so. Cars are an example of a normal good. The average economic player will buy a car when he or she has the money to do so. Air travel is another normal good. If people can afford it, they are more likely to make long journeys by airplane than by bus or train. Inferior goods. People buy some goods only because they cannot afford something better. These are called inferior goods. As consumers get richer, they tend to buy fewer inferior goods. A package of ramen noodles might be considered an inferior good because for those without a lot of money, it is an inexpensive meal. But for most consumers, as their incomes rise, they buy fewer ramen noodles. Ramen noodles, in this case, are an inferior good because people generally cut back on their consumption as soon as they can afford to do so. The term inferior good does not necessarily mean that a good is of poor quality. Instead, the term is used to characterize goods that produce relatively less utility than a more expensive good. As people get more money, they want the goods that increase their utility. They switch from inferior to normal goods. Inferior goods. Sort each item into the correct category to illustrate the differences between normal and inferior goods. Drag and drop the words to their appropriate boxes, then click Check Me. Incorrect sections return to the top. So you can go ahead and try that on your own. Substitute goods. Inferior goods and normal goods are related. Every inferior good has a normal replacement that people use when they can afford it. These normal goods act as substitutes for inferior goods. A substitute good is a good that serves a similar purpose or fills the same need as another good. Although few goods are perfect substitutes for one another, close substitutes are common. For example, margarine and butter are substitute goods. They are not exactly the same, but they serve a similar purpose and satisfy similar needs. Substitution and price. When the price of one good increases, it leads to increased demand for its substitute. This is called substitution. When the price of butter goes up, some people turn from butter to margarine. So when prices change for one good, demand changes not only for that good, but for its substitutes as well. As butter gets more expensive, demand for butter decreases and demand for margarine increases. This is true even if the price of margarine has stayed the same. Substitution influences prices and production because the possibility of substitution keeps producers from raising prices too much. In the United States, where there are many options from which consumers can choose, substitution helps keep prices low. Fungibility. A concept closely related to substitution is fungibility, an odd-sounding word with origins in a Latin term meaning to perform. Fungibility means that two or more goods are equivalent to each other. These are essentially the same good because one good cannot be distinguished from the other. For instance, gasoline is fungible. This does not mean which brand of gas a consumer chooses because all gasoline is eventually the same thing. All cars burn gas the same way. Money is also fungible. If a friend owes you $10, it doesn't matter much whether he pays you back with a $10 bill, 2 5s, or 10 1s. Non-fungible goods, on the other hand, are goods in which differences do matter. For example, shoes are non-fungible because everyone's feet are a different size, and different kinds of shoes are required for different occasions. Fungibility, like substitution, keeps prices down by ensuring competition. Producers do not like fungibility. The people who sell gasoline want you to go to their salon and not another company's, even though any gallon of gas will work. The people who sell gasoline want you to go to their station and not another company's, even though any gallon of gas will work. Producers try to overcome the fungibility problem by attracting consumers to their brand. Bending to demand. Elasticity is another important concept that affects the consumption of goods and services. Elasticity is a measurement of the flexibility of a consumer's demand for a good or service. The elasticity of demand for a particular good or service can be measured by consumers' responses to changes in price. If people buy fewer goods when the price rises, then that good has a high elasticity. On the other hand, if the amount purchased does not change significantly even if the price rises, then the good is inelastic. Examples of inelastic goods include housing, food, and clothing. Most luxury items have an elastic demand. People can do without them, so when the prices rise, they buy fewer of them. Necessities, on the other hand, have inelastic demand. Even if food prices go up, people still need to buy food. Of course, there is still some amount of flexibility because people can always buy less expensive food, but its relative elasticity is still rather low. Goods and services such as food, shelter, and clothing are necessary for staying alive. People's demand for them is inelastic. Other goods are not quite as necessary, but are still very important. For instance, for many people, cars and gasoline are necessary, and their demand for these goods is inelastic. For those who can ride a bus or walk to where they need to go, cars and gasoline are not as necessary. They have a higher relative elasticity because if prices go up, these consumers can simply drive less. Anything that a person can do without has a relatively higher level of elasticity. Public goods. You have learned that goods can be normal or inferior. They can also be substitutes. They can be fungible and they can be elastic. But the goods you have examined thus far all have one thing in common. They are consumed by individuals. For instance, when a person eats a sandwich, he or she is involved in an individual act of consumption. Even if two people split the sandwich, they each eat their half individually. A sandwich is an individual good. An individual good is something that one individual enjoys to the exclusion of everyone else. Not all goods are individual goods. Consider a parade. When a parade takes place, anyone can watch. No one person's enjoyment of the parade will stop anyone else from enjoying it. They are not splitting the parade the same way people might split a sandwich. Therefore, the parade is a public good. Public goods are goods that the public can enjoy without any one individual's consumption, reducing the consumption of anyone else. The features of public goods. Public goods have certain features that make them different from individual goods. Economists call these non-excludable goods. When a good is non-excludable, this means that it is available to non-paying people. A non-paying user is sometimes called a free rider. Because of the potential that some people will benefit from public goods without paying, there is very little incentive for producers to provide them. Public goods are also called non-rival because people do not have to compete for them. Unlike individual goods, public goods can be enjoyed simultaneously by a large, possibly even unlimited number of consumers. One consumer's use of the good does not diminish another's consumer's use of it. An extra parade viewer doesn't use up any more of the parade because a parade simply cannot be used up. That is part of its nature as a public good. A lighthouse is another example of a public good. Lighthouses provide light to enable ships to navigate safely in a harbor. A lighthouse is non-excludable because once the light shines, it is available for any ship captain to use. And because one ship navigating by the light of a lighthouse does not diminish the usefulness of the light for other ships, it is non-rival. I will continue with slide number 15 on the next video.